supported. We also have a lot of resources available to the whole community. So if you have not had a chance to check out the MJCC Live page on our website, please do that. We have anywhere between 1.5 dozen programs on any given day. We have a number of big events coming up for Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Memorial Day and Independence Day. So please do check those out, and please do join us for other programs that are of interest to you. The J is doing well during this crisis. Thanks very much to our members and donors who have continued to support us. We have not had to lay off any of our staff, which has enabled us to really continue to provide a robust online program and array of options for the community. And we recently secured a loan through the Payroll Protection Program, which will cover payroll expenses for a couple of months. And so we're in good shape right now, and hope to be able to reopen in the not too distant future. Obviously, it's up to the governor to decide when that will be safe for us to do so. But we're trying very hard to be ready for that day and prepared to serve the community in person as soon as we can. I wanted to thank our sponsors today, our presenting sponsor, Portland State University, as well as our other sponsors, Richard Barker, Wealth Management Advisor of Merrill Lynch, Barry and Carla Benson, Jonathan Singer of Barg Singer PC, Stuart Gordon Strauss, Architect PC, First Republic Bank, and the Jerry and Helen Stern Grandchildren's Fund of OJCF. We're delighted to have our two panelists with us this afternoon. First, Sharon Mirren, who serves as Multnomah County Commissioner for District 1. Sharon graduated from UC Berkeley with degrees in English and economics. She graduated from UCSF Medical School and completed a residency in emergency medicine at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. She and her family moved to Portland, where she has practiced emergency medicine, and she was elected to the Multnomah County Commission in 2016, where two of her top priorities include behavioral health systems transformation and addressing homelessness. Marissa Zapata serves as the director of the Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative at PSU. She is an associate professor of land use planning and director of the Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative. As an educator, scholar, and planner, Dr. Zapata is committed to achieving spatially based social justice by preparing planners to act in the face of the uncertain and inequitable futures that we face. Thank you both for joining us, and I will turn things over to the two of you.
Great.
So we need to unmute.
They're unmuted.
Marissa is still muted.
Ah, there we go.
I muted myself so that you wouldn't hear my cat. And just as a quick point out, my name is pronounced Marisa or Marisa. It's very common to add the second S. People love to do it. So if I don't make an announcement, it will never, ever go away.
Yes.
Thank you for that correction. I do apologize.
That's okay.
So, not sure where to begin. I can start and just provide a little bit of background about Multnomah County and the work that we are doing right now. Maybe a little in general. No one ever knows what the county does, but I am Sharon Myron, and I represent District 1, which is all of Multnomah County west of the Willamette River. So the MJCC is in the district. I live very close to the MJCC in Hillsdale, and it also, the district includes inner southeast out to Chavez or southeast 39th. And what the county does in quote normal times is we really support those individuals, organizations, but individuals who really don't earn enough income to meet their basic needs. We support the most vulnerable in our community. We work on issues such, a lot of public health is one of our biggest issues. We're seeing a lot of that right now. Also human services. So we support survivors of domestic violence. We address housing and homelessness issues. We have our community clinic system. We do a lot. There are also some infrastructure work that we do in unincorporated areas of the county. We also support our bridges. But, you know, there's so often a lot of intersection between the work that the county does in various sectors. And right now, everything is truly coming to a head where the COVID-19 crisis is exacerbating so many of the underlying issues and gaps in service and needs that really exist all the time in our community, but those are really being highlighted right now. And one of the most vulnerable of our populations in the county, though it can't be, this group cannot by any means be lumped into one group, but individuals who are houseless, who don't have a roof over their head, who are living unsafely, either actually on the street, unsheltered, in our shelter system, couch surfing, trying to find room to sleep on in other people's homes. And right now, with what we're seeing, people are in desperate straits. We have a number of services that exist at baseline, which, you know, we're seeing such overwhelming need. These services are being overwhelmed, and we are scrambling to address the needs that we're seeing. That's sort of like a big picture setup, and I can go into some more specifics, but I want to open it to Marisa first to talk about her work in general as well.
Thanks, Commissioner Myron. So we are a University Research Center at Portland State. We were formed about 1.5 years ago. Right now, we're really trying to focus on getting messages out there. So who needs what, who is doing fundraising for key activities. I saw Lydia from PSU is on the line, so I might ask her to see if she can dig out our list from our website. And if you've got people that you know need support, please let us know. We're happy to basically try to bat signal lift everyone's different needs as much as possible. We're also trying to attend every webinar that's being done nationally and putting together notes from those webinars to send them out to people, particularly the service providers and the government staff. I mean, nobody has time to go to all the webinars to hear all the great information. And so we're starting to compile everything and put it together. And lastly, we're really trying to help people who are either advocates or service providers really articulate what their community needs are. And so in spaces where we can actually do that work, we're trying to take care of some stuff. We heard some really sad stories about the degree of hunger that people are experiencing. You think about homelessness and you already know that people are hungry, but because of the way COVID is functioning, even normal ways in which we try to get food to people who are houseless, or how they can try to make do, all of those pathways have been shut down. And so we put a guide out on how to adopt a neighborhood camp and make food for that group of neighbors. And then we're going to be putting out a survey to try to reach people who are experiencing homelessness, to really ask them in the coming weeks, what is it that they want, right? Do they want to stay where they're at in a tent or on a neighbor's couch? Or do they want to be thinking about moving to congregate shelter or to hotels and motels? So that pretty much sums up what we're trying to do right now. And I can get into some of the statistics that are coming out across the country as they relate to COVID and homelessness in a little bit.
Thank you. I want to just point out, I think that Saul has put out a call for people on chat. If you have any questions, we're going to be leaving ample time to try to answer your questions so that we can definitely respond to what you would really like to hear from in terms of information. I would like to describe sort of the basic structure this has been very helpful to me, as you know, when I was first started on the commission, in how the framework by which I think of our sort of housing and homeless system as to how we're addressing a lot of the issues we're seeing. And it's one of those situations where we can talk about the three-legged stool. So there are three key features. The first is prevention. And this is, again, in those, quote, normal times. The best solution to homelessness is preventing it from happening in the first place. So we do a lot of work to try to keep people in their homes to prevent them from falling into crisis in the first place. So things like emergency rent assistance, help with electricity, paying their bills, whatever it is that they need. And just generally, rent assistance is a primary and really effective way to keep people in their homes so that they don't fall into homelessness. The second sort of leg of the stool or aspect of our approach has to do with shelter or kind of safety off the streets. And what this is generally considered to be is a very temporary measure to help people be safe and connect them with services so that they can be supported in the community, so that they can find the types of housing that they need and can move through and out of shelter. So that's sort of short-term and transitional. And then the third key element is permanent housing. I mean, that's really the solution, is permanent housing. And Dr. Zapata can talk a lot more about, you know, some of the research about the populations and different individuals who are out there, what constitutes, you know, we think of the homeless population and we often lump this into one big group, but it is so much more, as you can imagine, so much more complex than that. But in two large areas, there are individuals who have fallen on hard times, and we're going to see that multiply orders of magnitude right now, but have fallen on hard times, can't afford rent, and have lost their housing. So sometimes all they need is really that affordable housing, that grid, that one factor can get them back on their feet, can help them, and then they can sustain that. The other, and that's the largest population, I would say, that's out there. The other group that's out there are chronically homeless population. And those are individuals who really, you know, have been homeless for over a year or have multiple times and have significant underlying issues that are contributing. And those might be serious persistent mental illness, that might be substance use disorder, a serious physical disability. We're seeing a large population of people who are elderly, aging. You know, I'm in this group, but people over 55, you know, not that elderly, but there is such a huge increase in that group. And that requires a very different approach to help get housing. These are people who are often the most vulnerable and the hardest to keep in housing. What they need are services supporting them so that they can sustain the housing they get. And those might be wraparound mental health services, substance use treatment, a number of other different supports that allow them to be in that housing and stay there. And so those are kind of the different buckets, if you will, of what we see. And at every step of the, you know, for every leg of the stool in this crisis, we are seeing a tremendous exacerbation of need. So we're seeing it with the shelters, we're seeing it with people who are on the, you know, risk, on the verge of becoming homeless, seeing the huge need for supports. The county has taken, well, it's the county and city and a number of our partner organizations through the Joint Office of Homeless Services, where we're working together to support these communities and our community and to develop the strategies to effectively work. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Zapata, and then I can tell you about some of those very specific efforts.
Thanks. So we've got a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to try to answer some of them, but frame them really in the issues right now and probably the next year. Because I think what's happened has both shifted maybe the prioritization and order of responses, but not changed what those are actually requiring. So we know that nationally, according to some estimates, that about 21,000 or about 4% of the houseless population will need hospitalization because of COVID. And again, these numbers always sound small until you start trying to disaggregate them into particular locations and you start counting up hospital beds. And so we're trying to use a tool right now to really say this is how prepared Oregon is to actually serve this particular population. One of the reasons why I think it's really important for people to keep this in mind is that there is already a lot of negative stereotype and stigma with people who are houseless and thinking that they're diseased or dirty or gross. And so when we end up in this language around how people who are houseless are more vulnerable to COVID, the reasons that they might have a higher vulnerability is tied to the fact that they don't have access to great hygiene, so not being able to wash their hands as much. They can't stay at home, but more importantly, if they get COVID, in all likelihood, they have an underlying medical condition that will make them sicker, right? So I've got 2 vulnerable conditions on the stay-at-home COVID list, so I'm tucked in, never leaving my beautiful 2-story house. That's not an option for somebody who's living on the streets. So it's not that being unhoused necessarily makes you more at risk. It's the fact that because you're unhoused, you have certain predispositions to that. The other thing that we always have to keep in mind is that homelessness comes with 2 twin issues. One is that it is, right, this obvious need to provide housing. And one of you asked, is a lot of this due to the lack of affordable housing? That is absolutely the case. When we don't have affordable, stable housing, people aren't able to live in the places that they want to live. I think one thing to keep in mind is that places where there is a quote affordable housing market or where there is affordable housing available, that housing may not actually be in good standing. It may be very sub-quality and it might be very ripe for landlord exploitation. And so I always want to try to lift that up, that it's not merely a matter of providing affordable units, it's also making sure that units are of a higher quality. And so when we're thinking about that, we've got that issue going on. We obviously have healthcare, but more fundamentally, we have issues related to race. And so you've probably seen some articles talking about the disparate impact for Latinx and African American populations. Those numbers are real. They are not remotely surprising. The health inequities that communities of color face in this country are tremendous. But you also have to keep in mind in the houseless population, there are very significant racial disparities. And so when you look at the number of people who are experiencing homelessness around the country, about 40% are African American. The percentage of people who are Black in this country and the overall population is just 13%. And so we really have to wrestle with the fact that all of this is going to get compounded together. In the state of Oregon, Latinos or Latinx populations are about 13% of the community, and they have been 22% of the reported cases on COVID, where there has been testing and race has been reported. So the overall national databases, race has only been recorded for a fraction of the cases. So we expect that the disparity rates will become even higher. And so when we're thinking about response, if we don't think about this from a perspective of a racial equity lens, then we risk actually being ineffective in those responses. The evidence has been quite clear. What we should be doing is getting as many people who are houseless into effective hotel and motel spaces. I say effective because part of the calculus is what kind of ventilation system a hotel or motel actually has. And so this starts to get into engineering that I knew nothing about with aerosols as of 2 weeks ago. But fortunately, I've got a brilliant dean at PSU who loves to study this stuff and tweet about it endlessly. So we do need to think through that, particularly new construction, the ventilation system still might be shared across rooms. And if you saw the most recent story, that air conditioning has been linked to the dispersion of a specific restaurant in terms of COVID infection rates. And so it's got to be hotels and motels where people are in isolation, they have access to hygiene, they're not touching a lot of services. What Commissioner Myron was also pointing out, though, is that we're not particularly good at serving people who have been chronically homeless. And so I think there is a question mark on what that will look like for hotels and motels to serve those folks. The best way to serve people who have permanent supportive housing needs is through a model called Housing First. Housing First has proven infinitely more successful at helping people stay in housing for longer when compared to other practices. Housing First is no barrier housing entrance, meaning you come as you are. We're telling you you're going to have your housing, it's yours, you're going to stay here if you want to. And number two, we're going to have services for you to participate in if you want to, but we're not requiring anything. It's not sobriety based. It's not saying you have to take medication or use caseworkers. It's all about simply meeting somebody where they are at. And so I think in the short term, it becomes kind of a question of how do we balance that with the fact that hotels and motels might have other kinds of requirements and restrictions. So, yeah.
Thank you. I love the questions that have been listed, and I just wanted to respond to take a couple of those right now. And first of all, one of them is what steps have the city and county taken or should be taking to reduce the spread of COVID-19 among the houseless population in the Portland metro area. There is so much that is happening jointly and in alignment between the city and county in these areas. And one of those is we've expanded, we've continued to keep open our winter shelter system, our emergency winter shelter. So it's all about space, as we all kind of know these days. But keeping those shelters open, and in order to allow for social distancing at the shelters that we do have, we need to spread people out. And when we do that, it turns out we don't have as much space as we need for all the people, even who have been in our shelter system. And so we have expanded and opened several other social distancing shelters at a number of facilities. And one of the biggest, and I've volunteered at, is the Oregon Convention Center. There's also Charles Jordan Center. Let me have to look at the exact names. The Charles Jordan Community Center. There's a center for women in East County. And so we are expanding the space so that people can be safe there. In addition, there are 2 hotels that have partnered with the county for people who have symptoms, because the last thing we want in a congregate setting, obviously, is for someone to be there who has symptoms that can't be separated because there's the risk of transmitting to the rest of the community. So we have some great partners who have volunteered their hotels to be used for this purpose. And so we have opened those, and also working with the hospital systems to figure out ways to get people there if they're in emergency departments or inpatient and being discharged. So we have those facilities. The city has been working more on the side of alternative camps, alternatives with those encampment models. So we have Right to Dream 2, which is a sort of a village camp community. But even there, the social distancing is an issue. And so if we expand the space people need there, they don't have places to go, or people who are waiting to get into Right to Dream 2 don't have the place to go. So there are some camps that are being opened, 3 of those in Portland. And in addition, Marisa made reference to food access. That really falls under the purview of the county and is such a tremendous need right now. This isn't just in the houseless population. This also extends to so many people who are isolated and living alone, who are at risk, may have had congregate meals in the good times, but now can't have that anymore, so are alone and isolated at their homes. So there's meal services where we provide meals to people in the county. There are what I love is the partnership with local organizations, local businesses, a number of restaurants. There are some great catering businesses, local caterers in our county that are working to provide the food that's needed and help deliver it so that people in the shelters can have that, or that there can be packed meals provided for people to pick up if they're living on the streets outside. So some of those partnerships are great because there can be that synchronicity of supporting our local small businesses who are providing food, and especially a lot of our culturally specific providers who might provide meals that, you know, for people in different communities who might not be used to eating the type of food we would provide at our typical, you know, so-called typical shelter through our normal service. But to provide those types of meals, support those businesses, support the people most in need all together. And we're seeing needs for this just, I mean, it's through the roof, but we partner with local community organizations, which gets to another great question that's shown up here, to provide the services. For example, that, you know, the county isn't an expert on how to provide culturally specific meals or to, you know, to connect directly, say, with the Latinx community. But we partner with amazing organizations who do this work or who do the outreach. And through that, they are able to provide the services they know their community needs. And so we are doing a lot of that throughout the county. And in terms of the houseless population, there are so many amazing organizations that do outreach at baseline or provide food services at baseline. And we are supporting them and trying to be as flexible as possible in that work. And I will give you some names of those in a second, because someone asked a wonderful question about donating, which is just music to my ears and so thoughtful. But the county provides that outreach. They provide PPE to the shelters. We staff the shelters with county employees and others. And so there is a lot that we are doing both to help people do the right things during this crisis and prevent the spread of infections. We kind of hit this early on and hit it hard. And just a couple of really amazing organizations that I've just seen in action, and there's so many others, and I think Dr. Zapata maybe has a list, but I would suggest Join, who goes and does outreach to people who are houseless, and an organization near and dear to my heart is Portland Street Medicine, which is out there providing just medical services, information, outreach, connection, socks, snacks, a meal to those in need who are some of the most difficult to find and support in our community. So those are a couple of great organizations. And then tying to one other is, which ties into a question of, other than bonds, what is being proposed locally? And I see Dr. Zapata nodding, so she will hopefully address this too. But what is being proposed locally to deal with the systemic roots of homelessness? Such an incredible question. That is something that is so important to do at the county level. that we are addressing those, upstream, the roots of homelessness, so that we can have the biggest possible impact. Because if we don't start upstream as far as we can and address those, really the systemic roots, we're never going to get a handle on, we'll be throwing money downstream at the crisis points in the system where things have the least likelihood of working, are the most expensive, and are the least effective. So there is an organization called Here Together, which has been striving to raise the funds to provide the supportive services people need for the chronically homeless population, for people to live and sustain in facilities. Bond money can pay for structures, and we've been very fortunate with the Metro bond and the Portland housing bond that our community has so supported the building of structures. But for some people, what's desperately needed are the services, and there are very few ways to get the revenue and the resources necessary to provide those services. And that's what we really struggle with. The Metro measure that has been referred to the May ballot, which I urge everyone to support, is a way to raise the money to get services for this population, raised, I think, 200 to 250 million, and perhaps Dr. Zapata could speak more to that and other things.
Yeah, so I think that one of the things I loved about this question was it said, besides revenue, what are the structural changes that we need to work on? And that's where I really find that that's where our bread and butter is as a university. We obviously know that there is desperate revenue needed right now to, what I would describe continue triaging the programs that are the need areas. But this triage is going to go on for several years. Meanwhile, we need to be identifying what are the fundamental causes of homelessness. So how do we stop it from happening in the first place? And so, and so again, this is where I'm thinking there's a lot of stuff that we're going to need to do in the next year to protect people. When we talk about homelessness, we often talk about this in a very gross way of inflow and outflow. I just say, people who are going to become homeless, and how do we get people out of homelessness? And so we have got to make sure that we are stopping people from losing their homes. And so right now there's a lot of discussion. We've got rent, I forget the technical word for across the state, but no one can be evicted for not paying their rent.
Moratorium on, yes.
Yeah, moratorium, but it's not forgiveness. And and one of the challenges is that while that is in place, it is specifically tied to a demonstrable COVID-related issue. And so we are seeing people who are not having their leases renewed, because if you were in the first year of living in a place, you do not have protection. And so we know that landlords are choosing to not renew leases, so they're not evicting someone, and no one has any legal recourse. If you had anything else happening, then you can also try to evict someone. People will be looking for increased grounds for that. There was a report out, I think it was yesterday, and it turned out it was the person's grandmother, so this is weird, but then the landlord actually mentioned that they had looked up all of their tenants' stimulus checks using their social security numbers, and were texting them to say, are you going to pay rent this month? I know you got your check, right? And so we continue to see very, very problematic issues. Now, one of the things that you'll always hear in response, which I appreciate, is that, well, I'm a small landlord, or I'm running a nonprofit affordable housing development. If I don't get my rent, this creates a cascade of effect. And so in terms of legislation, what you want to start seeing is what is happening is these both ands, right? And so I want to see that we're saying, we're going to forgive tenants' rents for 6 months or a year. We're also getting a fund together, or the national government is working with the banks to forgive mortgage payments or other things that are due for that period of time as well, right? And so in the same ways that, our tourist industries are getting a bailout, we need our nonprofit and low-income residents to get an akin buyout, right? We don't want people who are landlords to lose their property either. But unfortunately, what you'll see is the lobbying groups will fight against each other. So there are things being proposed. I think those are the things we really want to be trying to lift up. Anything that is getting more money into the pockets of people right now. But if people start losing their home while they don't have jobs, we are going to see a significant increase in the population of people experiencing homelessness. And the bigger hole that we dig, the less distance that the money will go if the bond or if the revenue measure passes for the metro area. It will also start to affect across the state, and we'll start depleting further state resources by moving people from homelessness, or from moving people who are housed into homelessness, and then cascading that. So to me, those are that's probably the biggest thing that's being looked at that I really think we need to move on immediately. The other things are related, the big structural issues that we always point to are criminal justice reform. And so that is both the criminalization of homelessness. So things that are happening in Salem around, we're not going to let people sleep on the sidewalks. Okay, well, I know you don't like to see people sleeping on the sidewalks, but where else can they go? And well, we're going to make a really, really bad shelter and they can all go there. So things like that, decriminalizing certain things, because the reality is if you don't have a place to go to the bathroom, where can you go to the bathroom, right? And I get it, like it's not fun to walk through urine on a sidewalk. But again, if nobody has a place to go, what are they supposed to actually do? The other side of that, though, is making sure that we are decriminalizing arrest records, or arrests to start with, particularly for people of color, right? So we know there's over policing in communities of color right now. One of my fears, as much as I want everyone staying at home, is that we'll start to overly surveil people of color, teens of color, and that they're more likely to end up in jail for a longer period of time. One of the things that people don't think about is that if you cannot make bail or you are denied bail, you stay in jail. But what happens when you stay in jail? You lose your job, you lose your housing, you default on your credit card payments. And if you're able, and whenever you get out, let's just even say you're found not guilty and you're released with no parole officer, no support, this now completely blood red background record check and criminal record check and credit check, right? So those are some of the things that I think we could start working on immediately to really get that going. And then lastly is really just, as Commissioner Myron was talking about, this need for permanent supportive housing. Yeah, so I think this is going to, this question about, if infrastructure isn't adequate, how are we going to actually help have wraparound services that could actually support people? And I think that at least my understanding with how and the rationale behind Here Together was that in theory, and we can talk about whether I think this is actually going to happen, the City of Portland bond and the Metro bond is the bricks and sticks only and should be able to be able to provide the housing development, the acquisition of units, the new construction, and so forth. And then Here Together measure comes in and provides those services. I think one thing to keep in mind is they start writing the Here Together measure in more detail, is really seeing, is there still going to be an opportunity to do bricks and sticks in that measure in case it's necessary. For better or worse, if we do have a significant dip in property values in the region, it becomes a really great opportunity for the government to start buying up housing. And so that might be what we want to do first in order to have the ability to get people in housing with the services.
Thank you. Let's see, I'm just looking at a question. And it's the simple answer, I'm gonna give the answer before the question, but the answer is yes. So the question is, if the infrastructure isn't adequate, so like an adequate supply of affordable housing or residential programs for addiction and mental illness, aren't wraparound services limited in what they can do? Yes. Yes, they are. I mean, that is one of the issues that we have, because, and it sort of ties into what Marisa was talking about just now. If we don't have the places for people to go, we're never going to be able to get a handle on this. We need the facilities, we need the infrastructure, and for a certain subset of people, we need this wraparound services. We need both, or truly we will never get a handle on this. And this is something that we see in a lot of the services that the county provides, that we see in our mental health courts, that we see in our jails, where we see, with the district attorney's office. A lot of the people who are involved in the services we provide, or have committed, pretty minor so-called criminal offenses that are not harming individuals, are because of underlying behavioral health issues a lot of the time. People end up going to jail because of that, and then have to fulfill certain requirements. And then, but if they do, then maybe they could hopefully begin to turn their lives around. But we sort of, to be honest, we fail at every, or we don't meet the need at any level of that system. So we do not have the substance use treatment services we need, so that people can be transferred out of jail, so they're in jail longer than they need to be. If they get into one of those residential treatment services, once they get out of that, they don't have the housing to sustain them. And now they have this, criminal offense on their record. They can't get any other housing. I mean, that is the vicious cycle, and is part of what we need to be able to get a handle on. And one of sort of the key is, at least in our county, in our region really, is that supply, is that inventory of housing, and particularly the supportive housing, so that people have a place to go.
If I can build on that a bit, Commissioner Myron, there's two questions that I think tie into this really well, and this is this idea of the building units will take years. It does. I think that what we want to be looking at while we're doing that is acquiring units. So are there motels that can be, or hotels that can be renovated? Are there, fourplexes that can be purchased and renovated? Are we protecting our naturally occurring affordable housing, which is the housing that exists already and of the affordable income levels, but is at risk of being purchased and redeveloped? And then, of course, my personal favorite, which makes everyone really nervous, but I believe is the best role for an academic to play, is we can also just start taking units, particularly, let's say, all of these almost completed luxury housing developments that are empty right now. Yes, I see Dave Gallison is just horrified at what I'm saying. But, if I don't put the idea out there, we do have options. And what I think it's important to keep in mind is that these are value discussions, right? If we don't want to wait years for housing, what are our other choices? I'm not saying that's the best choice, but we also have things around vacant units, zombie houses in the region, right? We don't have the ability to easily take those kind of houses, right? So there are these things. And I think this gets to what Stuart Strauss is asking around accessory dwelling units. I think one of the toughest things right now is that we need everything, every option. Is one thing going to solve it? No. right? But accessory dwelling units get us more units on the ground. So we want that to go forward. I want to see that I can have a program where we're taking the zombie houses that no one's paying taxes on, nobody's using, that people are squatting in, and turn those into affordable units. I want to be able to think about home share programming, right? And so how are we, maybe particularly with seniors, letting them open up their homes to one another, and how do we support that? Now, all of those individual programs take a lot to administer. And so what I would personally love to see is everyone who's got these, I mean, I don't want to call them one-off ideas because they're not, but everyone's got these ideas to build a program to say, how are we going to do all of these things together? What I unfortunately end up hearing a lot of in my role is why one person's idea is the best, and we should just do that. And I love all the ideas, and I think they all have a really, really important thing to play in. So yeah, I want it all. I'm a land use planner. I'm for building all the things.
There was a question that just, oh, I'm on mute. Oh, no, I'm not. There was a question that just hit the chat
Yeah.
that I'm going to let you read over.
And do all people accessing this, are they able to see the chat? Should we read it out loud, or I'm still kind of a.
Everyone should have, I mean, I'm happy to read it for you or read it out loud. From a political point of view, there appears to be a real danger that actions to decriminalize homelessness are driving or will drive a backlash against bond funding and tax funding for housing and services. I hear very often is along the lines of, I've given the government more money year after year, and yet there are more camps every month. Can you speak to the sea change in policing practices over the past 5 years, and whether you think that has been effective or not, and whether you think things and where you think things should go in that regard?
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, you're bringing up such a complicated issue in terms of public perception and what's going on. You know, if you hear a lot of talk to firefighters, they'll say the way that you know our work is happening well is that you never see us. And so what we have to unfortunately measure with right now is that you're not seeing more people on the street. But there's no way to know that because we're seeing people on the street. And so it's also tough because if you weren't seeing people on the street, you wouldn't have the same interest in this issue. The issue of homelessness has always been there. It's only that now that there are lots of people on the street, that there's a zillion panels on homelessness. There's a new university research center on homelessness. Political careers are being made and broken on homelessness. And so, you know, you want to help people, you also want to keep people involved. It does become very scary to think that if people do vote for Here Together, and there's still the same number of people on the street in 5 years, it could be that, you know, we actually managed to keep 25,000 people off the street, but it won't matter in terms of public perception. So at the center, one of the things that we're trying to do is really help people understand that. And so we published a report in August talking about the conflicting counts around homelessness and conflicting definitions, but more importantly to emphasize that when you look at, say, Multnomah County, the number of people who were counted on the street or who were unsheltered, including people who were in cars, was about 2,000 people. When you add in across the year, everyone who's been served in emergency shelters and transitional housing and who has been houseless according to the school districts, you're much more into 25,000 people. And so we looked at the entire Tri-County area, and instead of saying that there were about 5,500 people experiencing homelessness, that's people you might be likely to see, we estimate that in 2017, there were 40,000 people who experienced homelessness. And that's likely an undercount because that doesn't include adults without children who might be doubled up. And so part of what we're trying to do is in some ways prepare people to understand that you still might see a lot of people on the street, but in part that's because that's the only population we think of as homeless. And unfortunately, we get into some scary prioritization conversations when we start doing homelessness. The first people who are prioritized, understandably, are families with children. And so then you start to understand why you're seeing a certain demographic on the street. So it gets very complicated very quickly.
And I really appreciate that description, and the concept of sort of proving a negative, and because actually comparatively to our sister cities along the West Coast, what we have been able to achieve is almost, I mean, the numbers are against us, and there is more, but compared to, pardon my dog, she thinks I'm a stranger, that we are seeing more, we are seeing less worsening than our other sister cities, if that makes sense. And so that's hard to characterize or quantify, but we do quantify some of that. And I think some of what this question gets to is a question of trust, and trust in our local governments, in what they're doing, and whether they are accountable, being held accountable, and holding themselves accountable for the work that they do. Their ability to communicate effectively, reach out, educate people, so that I've had so many conversations with people where they ask questions like this, or say, nothing's happening with homelessness, and then I talk about some of the programs that are in place and what has been happening with the Joint Office of Homeless Services and our partner organizations, and the real impact of the tens of thousands of people who have been prevented from falling into homelessness because of our programs, the thousands of people who have been placed effectively into housing. And they're like, oh, who knew that? Who knew? But I have so many of those conversations because clearly we're not having we're not effectively communicating the impact of a lot of the work that is happening. So that's why it's great to have these kinds of conversations and be able to get that information out there and answer questions. I also sort of along these lines, and that's something that I do feel is so important to follow up at the county, at the city, wherever we are, and appreciate the work at PSU and that Dr. Zapata is doing about just basic communication. And I also agree, I also hear a lot of ideas from people that are great ideas. I think, maybe there's an idea or two that just, you're like, that really wouldn't work at all. But most of them are really good ideas. And we do kind of need to consider every single option, and there needs to be a spectrum of options available because different people respond well to different types of environments. For example, I love the idea of tiny home villages. Those are great. And I have a friend who has an organization where they build those tiny homes and have volunteers do that and teach people who are houseless construction skills. And that is so wonderful. And it's an important part, but a part of a much larger universe, an ecosystem of housing options and what serves the most people in the most effective way. So we need to do, as you said, Marisa, we need to do all of this together, and also emphasizing one aspect of what we do continue to see with people who are living on our streets, and that is that the people who are chronically homeless are more and more suffering from pretty severe disability. So more severe mental illness, more severe substance use disorder, more severe just physical disabilities that they might have. So they are the hardest to serve. They're more and more the people who have sort of cycled through so many of the options we do have available, and for whatever reason, it hasn't worked. So not only are those people more desperately in need, they're also more visible and might have more of an impact. So when you're passing by them on the street. So it's that plays a role here as well, and points, this is even worse with COVID, it will become even more apparent and points even more to the need for sort of the services that we are desperately needed to support those individuals, because that's might be when people start to see a difference. And so I think that is important in our collective sort of consciousness about this. And I also loved, Charlene Zeidel has made a couple of wonderful comments, and I love, I totally agree, we need to figure out, in addition to all of this, how to build quicker and cheaper, and this is to the city, so I totally agree. We need to be, helping make things easier for people to build, like, the permitting process and the fees and all of those things, so that people can actually get out there and do the building in the way that they can and would like to.
I think one of the things, though, and I responded in the thread about this. First of all, I put my email address in the thread. You can also easily find me on Google, the Googles. I'm happy to talk with anyone anytime. Oddly enough, my schedule is lighter now because, unfortunately, everybody who does homelessness actual work they're too busy in the field doing things. So I'm more than happy to chat with people. I think one thing to keep in mind is that, because you see a lot about discussions about waiving SDCs, making development easier, that could have a lot of impact in particularly 60% up of medium family household income, particularly in the metro area, 0 to 60, and certainly in every other community in the state, 0 to 30% of median household income. I could give you the land and waive all the fees, and there's still no profit to be made on housing at that level. In fact, you're going to take a loss. And so this is one of the things that we really have to reconcile as a community, is that are we going to come together and recognize that, some people just don't have housing, and it isn't because they haven't worked hard enough. It's that the system.
Yeah.
Someone's calling me, so it cut out. And so it's tough because most of us were raised to believe that if we worked hard, we would overcome. And it's just not the case. And so one of the challenges becomes, what do we think in terms of housing? Do we think that everyone has a right to housing? And if they do, how do we actually provide it? Developers community, market capitalism, the housing market is never going to provide housing for people who make little to no money. And so we have to decide as a society if we're going to supply that or not. And that was actually my doctor's office calling. I have a telemedicine appointment. I would love to stay longer. But I really am happy to talk with anyone more. I love hearing people's ideas and how they're thinking about the issue. I put my 5 fave organizations in the list. I'm an academic. You can't really keep me to just 3 things. And that is JOIN, Northwest Pilot Project. They're working with seniors. Super huge issue. Research has shown, as Commissioner Myron was saying, not only do we have an aging homeless population, we have an aging first-time homeless population. Yes. So that is your grandma or grandpa thinking they had made it and then losing their housing. We have PAIR, fantastic group that works with youth, particularly youth of color. And then El Programa Hispana focuses on Latinx communities. There's a lot of stuff coming out from the Trump administration that is really, really coming up against serving Latinx communities because of its policies around immigration and undocumented immigrants. Anything you can do there to help them, they're not going to have access to the same federal monies. And then finally, SCI, great organization that was founded for and by African Americans. So I gotta go, but yes, much more. Email me, happy to chat.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you so much,
Zapata.
Marisa.
Bye.
Sharon. Usually this is the point where I would give you both a bottle of wine, so I owe you one.
Cheers.
We're really grateful that we were able to put this together today, and I want to thank our sponsors again for their support. Tuesday, May 5th is Giving Tuesday Now, hashtag Giving Tuesday Now. And for the MJCC, it will be a day for the J. We are going to have programming from 10 to 4. There may be a dance party involved. It will be a great day of programming for the J, and so keep an eye out for that. And our community celebration will be held May 14th. We will be honoring our Glickman Scholars, our 100 Days of Fitness winners, our swim teamers, our Maccabi kids, and lots of other folks. We'll have a performance by Nefesh Mountain, one of the Jewish bluegrass pioneers, because that's a thing. And also Bobby Gross from the Blazers will be an ambassador, and he was a champion on the 77 team. So we look forward to seeing you there. You can find out more at OregonJCC.org. And real quick, I'm going to go to the non-speaker view and just do a quick screenshot to prove that we're all here.
Oh, great idea.
So that way we can promote that we had folks. So I'm going to do that now if my computer will let me. There's one. I'm going to go to the next screen, maybe. Well, I think that's everybody that's left. So thank you all, and stay healthy, stay home, and we look forward to seeing you back at the J when we can. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.